All right, welcome back to another installment of the Wide Right podcast. Happy New Year to you. We're officially in 2023, or as I like to call it, the year that I have to invest in just for men, because the more and more
Join
I
the
look at
club.
myself, Carlos, I'm looking more and more like Frank Drebin from The Naked Gun. Of
Not that
course,
there's anything wrong with that. Frank Drebin was a silver fox, as they say.
Silver Fox. I'm more like a silver gorilla. I don't know what else to call myself
A
because
silverback.
Silverback, yeah. I mean, it's not a good look for me. As I age here, little by little, another year covering college football. Although it'll be a little different for me, I will be covering the Miami Hurricanes still, but I have added on some responsibilities for the Athletic, working much more involved in the recruiting process. I had a couple of national recruiting articles here in the last couple of weeks, including one from the Under Armour game where I spoke to 15 kids off the record or anonymously about NIL and different things. We're going to get into that. We're going to get into Cormani McLean, who every Miami Hurricanes fan is wondering what he's going to do. He told me at the Under Armour event that he's going to make his announcement on January 15th, which is a Sunday, which is kind of weird. But, technically can't really sign with a college anyway until the early signing period in February. We'll talk about Cormani. I've been all over the place. You've been all over the place, Carlos. You just got back from Universal Studios, man. Tell me about your holiday break, the family. How's everybody's doing?
I'm like Diddy, bro. I'm like Diddy. Been around the world tonight, yeah, yeah. Although that's another song from the early '90s that was mixed in there, but still, it was fun, man. Disconnected for a while. It was nice not to. I gotta tell you, I did not watch a single bowl game while I was on vacation. Didn't watch the college football playoff. Just watched highlights afterwards. Read articles about it, but I disconnected, which was nice. Just got to enjoy time with the family, and hung out at Universal, did some stuff in Orlando. So yeah, man, had a great time. Had a great time re-energizing myself to come back and start 2023 fresh. This is our first joint pod in 23 together, and it's the first one we've had in a while. So I'm excited to be back.
Yeah, Andrew Farelli was on here quite a bit with me because we were doing a ton of recruiting stuff. Andrew, of course, now with the Raw 7-on-7 team, which I was at today earlier. I went to their first couple of practices here Friday and Saturday. They've got Julian Sayin, who's the 2024 five-star quarterback commitment of Alabama. They got a bunch of kids. Another one, Michael Van Buren, a quarterback, a four-star quarterback that Miami's very interested in signing. He's a kid who plays at St. Francis Academy in Baltimore. I really like the way that kid throws the ball. Little undersized. He's just under 6 feet tall. Just turned 17 years old, doesn't turn 18 until April. So I'm sure he still has some more time to grow. But as far as the raw skills and ability, he's got it. And like I said, a ton of kids, a ton of stuff I'll be talking about. As I told you earlier, my athletic endeavors are leading me in different directions. So I want to include some more fresh content in terms of recruiting in the years to come. But you and I, Carlos, we will talk a ton of Canes every time I have you on here. And I want to get into sort of roster construction in this podcast because I feel like that's a big theme, right? With TCU getting
Yeah.
to the national championship game after a 5-7 season, Sonny Dykes going in there and basically flipping the roster pretty quickly. And I sat here, you know me, I'm Mr. Research. I love to sit there and crunch numbers.
Better you than me.
Yeah, I basically went back and looked at how every team has been built, the top 100 recruiting classes in the last 3 cycles, counting the 2023 class, what ratio it was in terms of high school recruits versus transfer portal guys. TCU went 14 and 14 high school recruits, 14 transfer portal guys. USC, of course, which was the darling, right? Everybody was like,
Right.
man, look at the quick turnaround that they went from 4-8 to winning or being in the Pac-12 championship game before Caleb Williams got hurt and missing the college football playoff. USC went 9 high school recruits, 20 portal guys, which brings me to sort of the big picture for Miami, right? Because Mario Cristobal in his first year, Carlos, went 15 high school guys, 11 transfers, and they went 5-7. It was sort of like a 60-40 breakdown of high school recruits to transfers. Some people would think, well, he's got to go transfer heavy, right? The guys that he's got there now, if you bring in a bunch of young guys, that means you're going to go through another rebuilding season next year. And guess what he does? He goes out and he signs 25 high school recruits. We're still waiting for Cormani McLean, and then 4 transfers. Now, look, they could add more transfers here. They're going to add more
Which
transfers.
I'm sure they will, yeah.
But I think we kind of learned a little bit, right? Based on that evidence, that maybe this is another growing pain year for Miami coming up?
Well, I think what Mario realized was he had a cursory understanding of the roster when he took the job. He didn't have an in-depth knowledge of the roster when he took the job. So he felt, based on what, like many of us, I fell victim to this too, based on what they had accomplished during that last season with Manny Diaz, and based on the talent he saw from Tyler Van Dyke in that offense, he figured if he added a few pieces there through the transfer portal, that he could at least be somewhat competitive, probably win the Coastal, maybe make the ACC title game, and start off on the right foot while he starts loading up with high school recruits the following cycle, which is this cycle that we're seeing now. What ended up happening was he got in there, saw what he had, and he's like, oh shit, this is a lot worse than I anticipated. This is not just, throwing some guys in here. Now I got to try and fill all these holes. How am I going to do this? And he started preparing himself. He started bracing himself for the bumps, but I don't think he anticipated it being this bad an outcome. So what he decided to do, I think, is take the philosophy of, I'm just going to start this from the ground up. I'm going to take as many of my guys that I can get from high school and build them in the way that I build my players, in the way that I want to build my roster and the foundation of this program. So essentially, he's not thinking about next season as, hey, let's turn it around, let's make a run to the playoff. What he's thinking is, this is year one of my team. These high school guys, these freshmen, this is my team here. These are the guys that I worked on all year to land and took time to get here and really did a great job of bringing in the top 5 class and will be the foundation for this program moving forward. So by the time this class hits their third year, now you're talking about probably a college football playoff appearance, possibly pushing for a national title. And what he's doing with the portal is just plugging areas here and there and trying to get his guys that have more than 1 year of eligibility to help with that run and maybe accelerate it a little bit, but not by too much. His long-term vision is really what we're seeing here with the way he's constructed this roster moving forward.
Yeah, and I think as Miami fans listen to this show and this podcast, of course you can watch us on YouTube. If you just listen to the podcast, you want to see our ugly mugs and my Frank Drebin impersonation. If you want to check that out, you can watch it on YouTube. But for those of you just listening, look, I agree with Carlos 100% here. This is a long-term sort of rebuild, at least the approach that Mario is taking. Again, there's going to be more transfer portal guys added to this roster. I expect people to be shifting in and out of this roster through the summer, right? You have up until school actually starts in the fall, the first week of school, to kind of finalize your roster for the season. So there's going to be more movement. There's going to be more players. But for right now, I mean, it hasn't come out in the Athletic yet. It'll be out Monday. But I kind of did a whole roster breakdown. I sent you an advanced copy, Carlos. I don't know if you got a chance to check it out yet. But I mean, I essentially broke down every single positions because I know a lot of us were like, hey, did this guy leave, that guy leave? It's hard to keep track of all the departures and who's been added and who's actually signed and who isn't. So if you want to check that out on Monday at theathletic.com, it'll be up then. But essentially, I mean, they still need to add pieces. And the way that I look at this roster, Carlos, David Lake, who covers the Hurricanes, he's one of the several handful of beat writers who's been around for a long time covering this team. He works for
I love his
Sports.
coverage. He's one of the ones that I don't have a feud with.
Yeah, he's over at Inside the U. He and I often text each other back and forth about, just sharing perspectives on the team. And him and Gabby Urrutia do a fabulous job on their podcast. I know Miami fans are very familiar with it, and I got nothing but complimentary things to say about both of them. But he and I sent him a message this week. I said, the more and more I look at this roster, I said, the more and more I think this could be a team that loses more games than it wins next year, because there still are some major holes. I said, I think they're 8 guys away, 8 transfers, 8 new additions away, whether it's high schools or whatever, from being an 8-win team. And I know that might floor people and say, man, what do you mean? They were 5-7. They have to be better. No, they lost some experience, and they're counting on some young guys to step up in a lot of areas. And there still are several positions that need to be upgraded. Number one, I still worry, do they have a number 1 cornerback on this team? I'm not 100% sure that they do. Tyreek Stevenson was their number 1 guy. This was a unit that got beat on several big plays. And what you have coming back, essentially, to Corey Couch, Daryl Porter Jr., Malik Curtis, Chris Graves, and Jaden Harris. The new additions are Devontae Brown, the UCF transfer who started 31 games, and he's the older brother of Damari Brown. And you have Robert Stafford. Miami's still trying to add another piece. The former Iowa player, who's, I think he's a 6-year player, Terry Roberts, excellent special teams player. He's the guy that they're sort of targeting as another sort of experienced person to add to the secondary, Carlos. But he's a guy who's dealt with injuries. And so I don't know what's going to happen here. Hopefully they get Cormani McLean. It kind of leads us back to Cormani,
Yeah.
right? If they don't get Cormani McLean, and again we'll talk about him separately here in a little bit. But if they don't get him, then I think that creates a hole where, okay, now you've really got to go out and add another guy on top of Terry Roberts to come in, because Cormani's the kind of guy who could come in and start, 8, 9, 10 games for you. Maybe not be great, but be good enough to be a solid starter for you. And if you don't get him, then that's problematic. So I would say cornerback is my top concern on defense. The second one would be defensive tackle.
That's the biggest one to me. Yeah.
Yeah, Mario mentioned. I mean, look, there's just not a lot of D tackles. You have Jared Harrison Hunt. You have Leonard Taylor, who was a 12-game starter. You have Ahmad Moten, who's another young player. You're hoping Jake Lichtenstein gets a 7th year to come back and play. I don't know that that's necessarily going to happen. You have Akeem Mesidor that you could slide over and play inside if you need to.
Yeah, he's not going to want to do that. He's got too much money invested
right.
in the NFL, where he's going to be a defensive end.
He's going to be a strong side defensive end. You have Thomas Gore, who's the Georgia State transfer. And then you got a couple of true freshmen that are coming in Collins Achampong and Joshua Horton, that are two true freshmen. It's very hard to sort of count on those guys to come in and play the defensive tackle position right away. So again, another position that Miami's trying to address here through the transfer portal. They've had guys come in on visits. They've had guys that they're chasing after. A couple of names, former Purdue defensive tackle Branson Dean, former Arkansas defensive tackle Isaiah Nichols, and former Kentucky defensive tackle Justin Rogers are some of the names that have been out there reported. Look, none of them are Daryl Jackson. Okay, none of them are that kind of a elite run stuffer. And by the way, there was a recent report by Brandon Sinone, Florida State beat writer for 247 Sports, who says that Daryl Jackson supposedly wants to come back to Miami. I've heard mixed reactions to that from different people in terms of whether or not that's really feasible, that it'll actually happen, and whether or not he'll do it. But we'll see what happens.
And did they say why he might want to come back to Miami?
There's plenty of speculation out there on the internet, Carlos, that he's not happy. The whole point of him going home was to be closer to his mother, who was ill. That's what my understanding was. That's the reason he left. I've heard other stories since then, since these rumors have come up. I'd rather not get into them, because you don't know what's real and what's not, and I don't want people to take whatever I say on here as fact when it's just rumor for right now. But look, the bottom line is, regardless, you look at that defensive tackle room, and that's another area you say just not deep enough. You need to get some experienced, meaty guys. And the kid they got out of Georgia State, very good player, but he's not big. He's 6 foot, 270 pounds. He's undersized. He's more of a speed rusher, pass rusher type.
Yeah, he's another strong side end.
Yeah, I just, so to me, that's another huge concern for me on the defensive side.
Well, for me, the larger concern is the defensive tackle spot, and I'll tell you why. You can develop those young guys in the secondary room, those DBs, over the course of a season, and make them good enough to where they're competent. And because of your safety play, because you've got a guy like Cam Kitchens, if James Williams continues to develop, you've got those two guys back there that can erase a lot of mistakes from when the corners make it. That's the ideal thing. On top of that, if you've got a good pass rush, you can make your corners better just through that, because you're pressuring the quarterback, making him get rid of the football sooner, and not letting him read through progressions and find the open man. So that helps. On top of that, I think defensive tackle is critical, because you need those guys to be able to stop the run. You need those guys to be able to seal up lanes and not let Florida State do what it did to us this past season, which is just run up and down the field and boat races through the run game. Kind of like UNC did a couple of years ago. In addition to that, because if you have a strong defensive tackle room, a strong defensive tackle group, you're also going to help your linebackers, because those D tackles are now occupying multiple offensive linemen, like I've said in the past. And once you do that, those linebackers are more free to read keys, fill gaps, and make plays. And when you've got a young linebacker like Wesley Basaint, you want him to be able to use his athleticism and not have to fight through offensive linemen and fight guards and fight people at the second level that are going to impede him from getting to the ball carrier. So you want defensive tackles in there that could make an impact, occupy the line of scrimmage, help create pressure along with those defensive ends, and serve to aid those linebackers. And if you're able to do that, I think that makes more of an impact than an additional corner maybe. I think if you got Daryl Jackson back, to me, this is a hot take. And I know everybody's probably going to shit on me for this, but here we go. Incoming, 3, 2, 1. I think getting Daryl Jackson back would be more important than getting Cormani McLean.
I don't necessarily disagree with you. I think in the end, you need those guys that can make an instant impact at that defensive tackle position because it's very hard to play true freshmen there. And Cormani McLean, like I said, he could be a starter for you. But if you also have Damari Brown, who I think is just as talented as Cormani. I watched them play on
Yep,
the 7-on-7 circuit with South Florida Express, and I thought Damari was more consistent than Cormani in coverage. Part of that might just be because Cormani took more chances and wanted to try to get picks in 7-on-7, let guys get past him. But I thought Damari was looked more ready, I think, for the college game, in my opinion, than Cormani did. But we'll see once he gets here. Either way, those are two areas that I think if Miami is unable to really address it by filling it with good, solid starting caliber players, those are going to be two huge weaknesses and two huge problems in my mind going into the start of the season in
absolutely.
2023. On the other side of the ball, look, offensive line, they're still trying to get another center in here, and I know that this weekend they're hosting former UCF starting center Matthew Lee, who's one of the top available guys in the portal. It's not that they don't necessarily like Ja'Kai Clark, but if you can upgrade and get yourself one of the best centers in college football, a guy who was all conference, a guy who just plays the game at a higher level than Ja'Kai Clark, that's why Mario was brought in to do. Ja'Kai could always shift to guard. He could be a guy who provides depth. And
Yep.
and in the end, you're just trying to make the offensive line better. So we'll see what happens there. I know Oklahoma and several other elite programs are after Matthew Lee. We'll see if he decides to come to
And
Miami or
look,
not.
Ja'Kai Clark has been okay, but he's not a world beater at center. And I don't think he's a starting center for a conference championship or college football playoff contending type team. To me, he's a center that could start another group of five school. And he'll do well there. He's been here. He's been a starter pretty much ever since he set his foot on campus, just because of the circumstances at guard and center. That doesn't mean he's been great at it. And I think if I were to look at the best five offensive linemen on the roster right now, I wouldn't name him in that top five.
Mm-hmm.
So I would try and figure out a way to probably move someone else to center if we're not able to land one in the portal. I would try and say like Inez Cooper, maybe even Jalen Rivers. They tried Lawrence Seymour there. Jonathan Dennis has been tried there. If someone else out of that top five, which I think their top five offensive linemen are Francis Mamagoa, Zion Nelson, Jalen Rivers, Cohen from Alabama, and probably Inez Cooper at this point because of the amount of run that he got last year. If you could find a center in that group and then to kick the other guy to guard, I think you'll be fine. But I think they need at least one more guy to push at that center spot, someone that's comfortable playing there, not somebody that you have to convert.
Well, again, I think the benefit of getting a guy like Lee, who's an elite guy at that center position, it just allows you to play everybody where they're supposed to play. You don't have to
Exactly.
shuffle guys around, and that's the benefit of it. But
Yep.
again, I see that more as a luxury. I see the bigger need
Yeah.
at receiver, where
Yeah.
you have a playmaking threat, somebody for Tyler Van Dyke to feel comfortable throwing the football in, a guy that the defenses have to prepare for, a guy who's kind of like Charleston Rambo was a couple of seasons ago for Miami. Obviously, everybody knows about Dante Thornton, the former Oregon receiver who Mario Cristobal recruited. I know I told you guys on a previous podcast with Andrew Farelli that he was still going to be taking visits elsewhere and going through the process here in January. The new name to pop up was former Michigan receiver Andrell Anthony, a guy who played for Josh Gaddis. Look, one thing I'm going to say here about the receiver position for Miami. You have some guys that I like younger guys. You have Jacoby George, who I think can still be a very good sort of number two receiver, a guy who can exploit a defense when he's healthy and playing at his best. You have some other guys that you could potentially go into the season with and be like, okay, we can get by this year with them. But if you want to be a team that pushes for the ACC title, you need to get a true number one receiver, and I just don't think that guy is on the roster right now. I like Nathaniel Joseph. I like Robbie Washington. They're true freshmen. It's very hard for true freshmen to come in and make a huge impact, and neither of those guys has a big physical body. They're undersized. They're kind of like Brashard Smith in the sense where they're under 6 feet. They're going to benefit from playing in the slot and being put in open spaces, but they are not guys that you throw the deep ball to and try have them go up and out leap DBs to get balls. You've basically got one guy who can do that in Colby Young, and if you can add a second, that'll tremendously help you. Because look, Frank Ladson is back, but Frank Ladson, I mean, let's look at his numbers. I have it here: 27 catches,
Like 400
298
yards.
yards, and one
Yeah.
touchdown. Colby Young didn't get to play the whole season, but he was effective. 32 catches, 376 yards, 5 touchdowns. Those are the top two guys in my mind on the outside right now, with Restrepo, Smith, and then maybe Jacoby George rounding out the top five. That's not necessarily a top five that you want to have. Leading your team at the start of a season, coming off a 5-7 year.
Yeah, you want a guy on the outside like another Colby Young that can make things easier on Tyler Van Dyke. You want a guy that doesn't necessarily have to be a burner to get open, that could use his body to be able to create separation, come down with 50-50 balls and give this guy a better target and have a wide range in terms of his catch radius. And that's what you want to see, which you got a little bit out of Colby Young in that sense. But then they started rotating coverage over to him, and then you were screwed because there was nobody on the other side that could do the same thing and offer the same type of skill set. Aside from the guys that you mentioned, I know he hasn't been linked or mentioned in terms of who the Hurricanes are targeting, but J. Michael Sturdivant, he's a receiver, redshirt freshman from Cal. He was our number one guy. Really, really good receiver, 65 catches, 755 yards, 7 touchdowns, is in the portal. He's from Texas originally, so I don't know if he'd be looking to come to Florida, but you never know. You know how Mario has those Pac-12 connections and knows about those kinds of guys. And I think he's got the sort of burn and athleticism. And at 6'3" is right in line with what you're looking for at receiver. But I agree with you. To me, the biggest hole is receiver. We saw what had happened with Tyler Van Dyke when Xavier Restrepo went down. He lost his security blanket. He lost a guy that he confided most in terms of who he goes to in that receiver room. And really, until Colby Young came around, he was struggling to find people to make plays. Michael Redding had his moments here and there, but he had a bunch of drops. Jacoby George flashed, but again, also had his drops. They couldn't find the consistency they needed on the outside. And I think adding another body there, just in terms of adding guys that can make plays, that's always good. I mean, even if let's say Jacoby George ends up panning out and beating this other guy out as a starter, at least you've got another guy on the roster that can go out there and make plays. You've got more depth, which I think overall was the biggest issue for the Hurricanes this year. And it has been for a long time. They could have good frontline talent at certain positions, and maybe even their frontline talent, their starting 11 on both sides, is good enough to compete. But once you get an injury, or once you got a guy that gets a setback or isn't able to go, now you've got problems because the guy behind him is nowhere near as good.
I agree. And again, excellent freshman class. I mean, it's ranked in the top 5. They get Cormani McLean. It'll stay there. But again, think about this from a big picture perspective, Carlos. What Mario did ultimately was say, you know what? I'm not making this a quick fix. I'm laying a foundation with a young class. These are the guys that we're going to build around for the next several years, which tells me, again, he's okay with not necessarily winning a bunch of games next year. Obviously,
Right.
he wants to win, but I'm saying he understands that there's going to be a long-term approach to this. And I think Miami fans have to get themselves ready to deal with that. Because look, the bottom line is he went out and he signed 11 transfers last year. Only 5 of them really ended up making a big, sizable impact when you think about it. And I mean that from were they even in the starting lineup? Only 5 of the 11 guys started at least 6 games. Henry Parrish, who turned out to be your leading rusher, Frank Ladson, Akeem Mesidor, who I thought was their best defensive player, Mitchell Agude, who was an okay rotational defensive end who started X amount of games, and then Daryl Jackson, who ended up losing to Florida State at the end of the year, a 12-game starter who was good, but didn't really grade out as well as Leonard Taylor. So he was really your number 2 defensive tackle. Still a huge loss to lose him. But those were your 5 guys. Everybody else that they signed in this last class, they played. Some of them were in rotations, but not meaningful, major impacts. When you look at that USC team, and I broke it down and it's in my story, they signed 20 transfers. 6 of them ended up becoming starters on offense, including their left tackle, obviously Caleb Williams, and then Jordan Addison. They actually had, I think, 2 receivers, several linemen, a running back, Travis Dye, and
Yep.
Caleb Williams. I mean, that's major impact. That's going out and saying, hey, we're not waiting for these guys to grow up. And that's why USC was able to have the kind of season they did. On the flip side of it, only 4 starters on defense. And you saw how bad their defense was. Those weren't necessarily big impact guys. Had they done as well on offense, recruiting through the transfer portal, USC might have been in the playoff. They might be where TCU is right now.
Well, it's also feast or famine in the portal, right? So I think what Mario's doing this year is he's taking his time more rather than just jumping on guys and taking a bunch of guys early in portal season. He's looking for quality as opposed to quantity at this point. He figures if these guys aren't going to come in and make a major impact, or if I don't have a role where I see them fitting into right away that they fit perfectly, then I'm not going to pull the trigger on them. It has to be a situation that I feel fits our current needs, because he doesn't want to sort of create a situation where high school recruits are turned off by the amount of transfers that you're taking, because that means you're going to have to wait longer to get on the field, right?
Right.
At least one more year. And I think that's one of the things that attracted a lot of these guys from this past recruiting class was the ability to play early and be sold as part of the foundation for rebuilding this program. So I think that's why Mario slow played the transfer portal a little bit. Whereas Lincoln Riley, he felt he had enough talent in USC and enough guys that he could bring over to compete immediately for a national title. And he almost did. He almost got into the playoff. So it's a different situation. There's not a lot of Jordan Addisons out there, right? There's not a lot of Caleb Williams. There's even not a lot of Travis Dyes out there, to be quite honest with you. So it depends on what you're able to get in the portal. If you can't get the biggest guys that can make an impact right away, the best players, then it's kind of a crapshoot, really, because you don't know what you're going to get, especially if you've got guys coming over from non-Power 5 conferences and you really don't know how they stack up against Power 5 competition. Yeah, they could have put up big numbers in a group of 5 school, or even, let's say, an FBS school, an FCS school, but you never know how they're going to transition their game to a high level in the ACC. So I think at the end of the day, what Mario is doing is, like you said, he's ripping everything out, starting from the ground up, and he's only going to take transfers if it meets an immediate need and he thinks he's got the perfect guy to fit the role that he has in his mind.
It's really more of a Nick Saban, Kirby Smart, Ryan Day approach, to be honest with you, because you go back and you look at Ohio State, Georgia, and Alabama's last few recruiting classes. Yes, they took transfers, but it's still predominantly elite high school recruits. The blue chip percentage for these guys is pretty ridiculous. Let's look at Georgia, for instance. In 2021, 20 high school recruits, 3 transfers, but they had an 80% blue chip percentage as far as their high school recruits. Okay. The next year, after their national championship in 2022, their 22 class, 30 high school recruits, 1 transfer. But 73% blue chip percentage. 22 of the 30 guys they signed were blue chip recruits. And then this year they went 26 high school recruits, 2 transfers, and they're 85 blue chip percentage, which is really, really good. Miami, for instance, their blue chip percentage has been pretty consistent, believe it or not. It's been in the 61% for 2021. 14 out of the 23 were blue chips. Last year, Mario's first class, 10 out of the 15 were blue chips, which is 67%. And in this class, 17 out of the 26, counting Cormani McLean, is 65% are blue chips. So where you want to be ultimately, if you want to become Alabama, Georgia, the Clemsons of the world, the Ohio States of the world, those guys recruit in the 90, 85, 80 something percentile in terms of blue chips if you're going to go this formula. Now, Florida State is interesting because that's really who you should be comparing Miami to. They're in the ACC, they're in the same state, they recruit the same level athletes. People have sort of criticized Mike Norvell and said, well, his recruiting classes, they're not as good as Miami's and they're not as good as Florida's. Miami and Florida are ranked higher. But people don't realize all of these recruiting rankings ultimately are based on how many kids you take. And if you look at Norvell and Florida State, they've signed 17 high school recruits in each of the last 3 cycles since he's been on the job, counting this year. And their blue chip percentage is in the 40s. 35s, obviously lower than Miami, but still, if they were to go more with high school recruits, I don't think they'd be having the success that they're having right now, because they signed 12 transfers in 21, they signed 14 last year, and they went with 8 right now, and they've got I think the number 1 transfer portal class in the country according to 247 Sports, unless it's been changed here in the last few hours. And it's their approach, and it's working. They're getting the Jared Verses of the world. They're getting the Jermaine Johnsons of the world. They're getting some really good players, Carlos. And I sat there and I broke down FSU's roster. I mean, there's a reason why people are picking them to win the ACC next year. And I know in the end, Miami fans are going to say, look at Florida State, look at Florida State. They're kicking Miami's ass. But again, I think it goes back to Mike Norvell's approach is different than Mario Cristobal's.
And here's why, and I'll tell you why. The reason why Mario Cristobal is able to break it down to the studs and start from the foundation, and why he's going to start taking, or he's taking less transfers than Mike Norvell, is because Mario has more job security than Mike Norvell.
Yep.
Right. So Mario's got a 10-year contract for $80 million. The buyout is heinous until you get to like 7th or 8th year. So he knows he's got the time to build his program, and he's been given the keys to the football program to do that and build it in his own image. And how do you do that? You build it with your players, your handpicked guys out of high school that you mold from an early age, from the time they're freshmen, they set foot on campus, to the time they leave the University of Miami. And you create that continuum of culture where that starts bleeding down into each class that you recruit. And that's what Mario is doing. He's got the time to do it. So he could take a 5-7 season. He could take a 6-6, 5-7 next year until you get to that 3rd year or 4th year where you finally got that core of guys that he's been after to make a run at the college football playoff or a national title. Where Mike Norvell, coming off Willie Taggart, coming off the things that have happened early on in Mike Norvell's tenure there at Florida State, needs to win immediately, which is why he gets the goes the heavy transfer portal route. And that's not sustainable. At some point, he's going to crap out, man. Everybody craps out in Vegas. It happens. And you're going to have to rely on those high school recruits. And if your blue chip percentage is 30 or 40%, and you got to rely on those guys that you've been recruiting in the past, and you can't fill those holes through the portal, then you're going to have a down season, and probably a pretty ugly one. So what Mario is trying to do is build a program that is sustainable for the long term, not just the quick hit, which you might see with a team like USC or a team like TCU. And once these guys cycle out, these transfers that have come in, do they have a drop-off, right? Is there a valley? Because they have not built the foundation with the high school recruits to then continue to progress upwards and move guys in as other guys graduate or leave for the NFL.
I find it fascinating as hell because look, the bottom line is this is a new way to operate in college football, right? And I think that the whole thought process with Mario is he's an elite recruiter. He's going to come in, he's going to bring in great players, but the transfer portal creates a situation that none of us are really used to at the college football level. I mean, obviously it's like free agency every single year. You've got to almost convince the guys that you want to come back to come back. You need to sort of hold on to your own players. And if you look at it, I mean, Mario lost a number 2 defensive tackle in Daryl Jackson, and that hurts.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of thing that could happen to you as you plan this out. You might have a great recruiting class like Mario did this year, but if 5 of those guys decide to go in the transfer portal next year because they don't like the situation, they're not happy with their playing time, whatever the situation is, then all of these rankings, all of these high school rankings, this high school plan, it's a failure because you don't end up maximizing what you need to maximize. And that's the part that I find interesting as hell, because the whole preface of hiring Mario, again, was he's an elite recruiter. He's going to help you. Well, guess what? In today's game, you got to be both. You got to be an elite recruiter, and you got to be able to work the transfer portal really, really well. And I think if we were to grade year 1 of Mario's transfer portal, what would we give it? A C? Right? 5 out of 11?
C plus, maybe.
C plus, maybe. I mean, there were more misses than hits. Which look, Florida State, you go back and you look at all their transfer guys, not every single one of them hit. But the bottom line is Florida State's 10-3, coming off a bowl win in their first 10-win season in a while. And there's a lot of momentum, a lot of excitement. Whereas Miami, we're sitting here and we're talking about, man, this might be another rebuilding year.
Yeah, and I think Mario harps a lot on, and he's talked about it since he's got here, that it's all about talent acquisition, right? That you've got to acquire talent, but it's also about talent retention. If you don't retain the talent that you recruit and that you sign through the transfer portal, then you're always going to be constantly working with a hole, right? You're trying to fill a hole that never gets filled. And that's really the situation the Hurricanes have faced for so long. So it's a situation where Mario not only has to bring these guys in, but he has to keep them. And how do you keep those guys here? That's the question. And I think Mario's really going to be focused on that moving forward to try. And I think the way he sold the vision to these guys that he's recruited is that, listen, you're going to come in here, you're going to compete. You're going to be part of this foundation, but to be able to do that, you're going to have to earn your way onto the field. It's not just, listen, I'm handing you the keys, jump on the field as a freshman and go. You're going to have to fight to get there. And I think that's the culture that he's building from the ground up. Like we've talked about all year long. Part of the problem is not just the talent, it's culture. And that still continues, that former culture, that sort of entitled feeling needs to continue to cycle out of the program until Mario has gotten his culture fully in grasp there at the University of Miami.
I want to get to some mailbag questions, but there were topics that I teased to that I want to make sure we hit on before we get to the mailbag questions, Carlos, because we haven't done a show in a couple of weeks here.
Which, by the way, I flipped my hat over so you can see for you guys on YouTube, because I knew somebody was probably going to talk shit saying I was wearing Florida State stuff. This is a Gryffindor hat.
That's correct. That's the only house you represent that's maroon and gold there.
There you go.
Couple of topics I want to hit on. The Under Armour All-American game. I wrote an article, like I said, giving these high school All-Americans the opportunity to speak anonymously about some of the NIL offers that they received, as well as where they really ranked it in terms of their importance and their decision-making process. I don't know if you got a chance to read that article. I know you said you weren't reading many of them, but that one came out earlier this week. One of the more popular ones. I went on like four different shows to talk about it because everybody loves NIL.
Oh yeah.
The one takeaway I'll share on here, and again, I tell you to go check it out at the Athletic, is for as much as a strong system Miami has here in terms of NIL and being able to help kids, the picture I got from a lot of the elite top 100 type ranked players in the country that were playing in the Under Armour game, Carlos, is a lot of them, yes, money's important to them, but I also think it still comes down to culture fit. Do they go to a place where it's exciting, that cranks out NFL players, that has a stadium that's packed every single day? All of those other factors still matter to them, player development, etc. And right now, Mario's a great recruiter, but we got to see what kind of talent he starts putting in the NFL. And this isn't a group that's going to be this team isn't going to put a lot of guys in the NFL off of this team. So that's another sort of hurdle that you have to go through here in terms of saying, well, we put X amount of guys and we did this and we did that. Yes, Mario had success at Oregon putting guys in the NFL and having first round picks, but he's in a different environment now. He's got to sell Miami's environment. And I still think that that's one thing that hurts Miami is the fact that they're not putting out first round picks at the wide receiver position. They're not putting out first round picks at edge rusher after Jalen Phillips and Gregory. So they go back to sort of being what they were before. Those are the kind of things that I think when it comes to recruiting future All-Americans, that's still going to matter.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, it's one of those deals where Mario has sort of a little bit of a shelf life where he can live off of what he did at Oregon. And it's gonna end this season because he pointed back a lot this season at saying, look at how well Oregon is doing. We recruited all of those guys. We were very successful at the place we were at before. We've been very successful all along the way. Everywhere we've been. All that shit needs to end. At some point, there needs to be production on the field from his guys that he's brought here at the University of Miami. And I think, it's going to take a couple more classes for that to happen. But how many losses can he sustain while he does that before recruits start turning their noses away and saying, listen, you're not fixing anything. It's more the same. But to me, I think Mario is eventually going to get it right. I think once you flood this program with talent and competition, where there's competition at every position, there's depth at every position, then it becomes not what it used to be, I think, in its heyday, but it becomes a contender. It becomes, like we've said, a Michigan. It becomes one of those programs where they can be consistent and possibly make a playoff and make a run. But it's going to take more than just one class. And how do you continue to get these guys there if you're not having the success in the field or getting guys in the NFL? You may have a few guys on this current roster going into next season that go into the NFL and maybe not first round picks. I think maybe Zion Nelson, if he has a really good year, could be a first round pick still. I think Jafari Harvey could be a third or fourth round pick. Akeem Mesidor, I think, could be like a second or third round pick. So you've got guys on that roster that maybe can get other recruits excited. But I think at the marquee money positions, DB, wide receiver, quarterback, I don't know what TBD is going to do this season. We'll see. I mean, if all those guys end up having really good seasons and get drafted at least, second to fifth round, then I think that's a bit of a feather in Mario's cap that he can build off.
Yeah, he's going to need to have some guys develop and exceed expectations in terms of what some people are thinking about them right now. One thing I will say for Mario, from talking to a few players at the convention, same stuff I heard from Francis Mauigoa and some of the other players who signed with Miami. Respect for the way he recruits, respect for the way that he's honest and upfront with them. Cedric Baxter, who ended up signing with Texas out of, he's one of the elite running backs in the country. I think number 2 running back in the country. He ended up telling me that, Mario came to visit him at Orlando to see if he could flip him sort of at late in the game. And, one thing he said was, look, the one thing about Mario is he is genuine. He's a great recruiter. You like talking to him. You like being around him. I think that's going to, continue to be a feather in Mario's cap. But again, I think player development, that's what I took away. Miami has to put some guys in the NFL here in the next couple of years. All right, moving on to another subject from the Under Armour game, Cormani McLean. I told you we'd talk about that. Again, I reported at the time when I was up there while he was holding the U up and doing that and taking pictures and with the Miami hat on, all those things. I did get a chance to sneak in a few words with him. He didn't want to do interviews, but having known him from the 7-on-7 circuit, I got a chance to chat with him a little bit. Basically, he said to me, I'm going to make my announcement on the 15th. What that announcement is, I don't know what it will be. I think, there are a lot of people who feel the same way I do, that it's never good when a guy delays a decision when he's committed
Yep.
to a school. Colorado, obviously, Alabama are schools that were recruiting him. And we'll see what happens on the 15th. I don't have the answer for you. I honestly do not know. He told me everything's going to be all right. Miami's my school and this and that. But again, the delay,
You never know with these kids.
you never know with these kids. And the one thing I'll say to you, every single Miami fans, I've tried to make this point, and I wrote this literally the day he announced he was delaying this decision. His mother did. It doesn't matter if they get him in this class or not. It's still a foundational, strong class. So if they don't get Cormani McLean, sure, you shrug your shoulders and say, "Damn, number 2 player in the country is going somewhere else." But if he decides to come, great, you got it, the number 2 player. I don't think it knocks Miami back in any way, shape, or form, other than okay, now they got to go out and get a transfer portal guy to come in and fill that scholarship.
And I don't think it sort of dampens the job that Mario has done with this class, right? Coming off of a 5-7 season, his first as a head coach here, all the turmoil this team went through this season, 5 losses in a row at home, and he's still able to land a top 5 class with foundational players, getting flips at the end with Achapong, with Mark Fletcher, with Damari Brown, landing Damari Brown's brother in the transfer portal, Francis Mayangola's brother in the transfer portal. This is a class that can be, like we said before, it might not be the best class the Hurricanes have ever recruited, but it might be one of the most critical ones because it's the one that's going to push Mario's agenda forward and lay the foundation for what he wants this program to be from here on out. So to me, either way, just the fact that he's in contention for Cormani McLean right now, especially back in September when people were saying he had absolutely no shot, and that his going to speak at his high school in Lakeland was ridiculous. But guess what? Those moccasins made their ass up to Lakeland, baby. Gave him a hell of a speech and got him in the game. And Cormani McLean at least is a 50-50 shot at coming to the University of Miami. Whether they land him or not, who knows? But at the end of the day, at least they're in the game for him. A player that Manny Diaz would have no business recruiting and would no way, shape, or form be in the middle of this hunt.
Couple of things here. Miami revealed its plans for its football facility. I reported long ago about this happening and how much money they were investing. I saw some people reporting it was going to be $100 million job. I know the Gators, who just finished their brand new football facility, spent $85 million on theirs. I was told by somebody very, very high up in the process, Carlos, that this thing's going to cost closer to $250 million than $100 million because of the amount of work that needs to be done. It's a 7-floor facility. For those of you that haven't seen the renderings, I tweeted it out on Twitter. Others have as well. The school tweeted it out. All the different details of what's going to be inside there. There's press releases. You can read that on the website if you want. But ultimately, Miami has to fundraise here a lot of money to get this thing done. There's not a lot of land in Coral Gables. It's one of the toughest places to build anything, to have construction crews, all that kind of
zoning
stuff.
laws suck there.
So right, and I think the reason why I was given that message ultimately is, look, it's not $100 million job. It's going to cost us more, and we need to be raising more money for this to cover those kind of expenses. So just to clarify that. And then, I will be going to the coaching convention tomorrow up in Charlotte for 3 days. I'll be sitting in on a couple of the meetings and hopefully running into some of the Miami coaches. I think most of them are going to be grad assistants and analysts and stuff that are on the team. Not too many of the actual assistant coaches will be there. But I was also
those are the guys hunting for other jobs.
Right. There'll be a lot of guys there, high school, college coaches, all kinds of people.
That's where most of the connections happen to be able to land college jobs.
Right. So I'll be up there along with Sam Kahn and I think Andy Staples is going out there. There's going to be a whole bunch of us from the Athletic out there talking to coaches and figuring things out. But I guess my whole point is what I was told, there will be changes to this staff. I'm expecting them. I'm expecting some news here. As I've tried to say on the Big O show when I make my Tuesday and Friday appearances, patience, patience, patience. Everybody wants to see things done right away. Obviously, Mario does not operate in that fashion. Part of this is, some of these guys are guys that he brought in his first year, spent a lot of money to bring in, made a big deal about it. It always looks better when they go find a new job and move on than to have them fired. I think all of that plays a role. But ultimately, there will be changes to this staff. I expect there to be. Who look, you guys all know who the names are, right? I mean, do I need to sit here and spell them out for you? Who struggled on this team this year? What units, etc. I think those are the expectations as far as who could potentially be leaving.
Yeah, and I think another interesting bit of news is what's going on with Michigan and the NCAA and the sanctions that they're going to be levied against that program for violations, recruiting violations that took place during 2020 and 2021, I believe, during the COVID period, where they could not have face-to-face contact with recruits. There were some violations in terms of how they operated their program, and from what I read, a bunch of the coaches that were part of the violations are no longer with the program. So what does that tell me? And maybe Josh Gaddis, that's part of that investigation as well. So what happens if Josh Gaddis gets an NCAA penalty and is not allowed to coach because he's suspended for one season?
I don't know. We will find out. I will talk to our Michigan writer and find out what's going on with
Yeah.
that. But look, for right now, I can just tell you that I expect changes to the coaching staff. We will find out. I'll be back and do another show next week. I'm actually going to have Malik Rozier, the former Hurricanes quarterback, on with me next Thursday. He asked if he could come on, and I know he's launching his own new podcast soon. Wanted to talk about that, and we'll talk about my experience up at the coaching convention and what that was like. But that's on tap. Should we get to the mailbag? I got one more item actually before we get to the
Do it.
mailbag.
Do the item. Do the item. Let's be thorough today, man. It's the first one in 2023. We've got to set the year off right. We can't leave any stone unturned.
Manny Diaz, top 5 defense with Penn State. Go.
That was a trick one, wasn't it? You just dropped that in my lap just so it could explode in my face. Now I feel like Daffy Duck after he tries to smoke that trick cigar and he gets his bill going backwards. I don't know why that's surprising to anyone. Everybody knew Manny Diaz was a really good defensive coordinator. Anybody that said he wasn't, just doesn't understand football and didn't see what he did here as a DC under Mark Richt. Was the defense terrible after he took over as head coach? Yes, it was. Part of that was Blake Baker. Part of that was lack of talent. I think the year that he was the defensive coordinator and serving as a head coach, I think it was too much for him. His focus was split. He wasn't able to be as hands-on as he wanted with the defense. And I also think that having Blake Baker there for a time created bad habits with that defense that he had to fix, but didn't have enough time to fix them. And it ended up costing him in the long.
Well, Penn State ended up winning the Rose Bowl and had a great year. I saw Manny on the sidelines at the state high school championships when St. Thomas was playing. They were after a couple of kids there, including King Mack, Conrad Hussey. Conrad Hussey ends up flipping to Florida State at the last minute. But Penn
Which, by the
State,
way, let's give that kid some props. That's a great name. I love Conrad Hussey.
yeah, and King Mack is another one.
No, that's a great one.
Terrific as well for the all name team. All right, so we're gonna get to the mailbag here. We got a few. Some of them are gonna repeat a little bit. I saw some of the topics here.
Stuff. Which, by the way, one more hot take. Manny has another head coaching job. If not before next season, the season after that.
All right, I agree with you. I think he'll get another chance. I thought USF would be a good landing spot for him. Another, sort of G5 head coaching position like a Temple. Yep. We'll see where he ends up going. This is Ryan Falcon, 123 on Twitter. Who are the must-get guys in the portal? Again, it's not so much the names for me as it is the positions and the level of experience. I think at this point, you only take redshirt freshmen or second year, like really young guys like Anthony Lucas, the defensive tackle from Texas A&M who went into the portal. You only take those kind of caliber guys, top 100 recruits that essentially would be a second year freshman who would come in here already ready to play because their body's been through a full year of conditioning. Other than that, I'm taking older guys that you can plug and play because that's the view that I have. You need plug and play guys at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. You need guys that can either be frontline starters or guys that are counted on the rotation that you can move in there and play a good amount of snaps per game and be part of the first or second team. You're not going to go out there and take a guy that's only going to play 4 to 5 snaps a game. You need guys to make impacts.
This is from Alex Perry, A. Perry, 1927. What are realistic expectations for 2023? The new offensive line has me feeling a lot more optimistic. Are there any planned changes for the coaching staff, or is the whole group expected to return?
Well, we sort of covered a little bit of that. I think when we were on my pod before the end of the year, we ended up saying 8-4 based on the schedule breakdown, but I feel like 7-5 is a realistic goal for next season.
Yeah, I think getting to a bowl game with assuming this roster is as is, and maybe you add only one or two more transfer portal guys. In the end, I think it'll be 5 or 6. But if you only add one or two more transfer portal guys, then I don't see how this team is markedly better. The offensive line I do expect to be better. I think the running back position will be better. It's going to be healthier. I like Mark
Mm-hmm.
Fletcher a lot. Mark Fletcher, by the way, scored a touchdown on an 81-yard touchdown catch today in
Like
the
that kid a
Under,
lot.
or not the Under Armour, but the U.S. what used to be the U.S. Army game in Texas. I think Ray
He
Joseph ended
scored a
up
touchdown
scoring a
today.
touchdown as well in that game. Good sign from those guys. But again, you're counting on a lot of true freshmen to come in and play right away. Some of the guys have the bodies. Ruben Bain has the body to come in like Nigel Kelly did and be a rotational potential starter as the season goes on and his body adjusts to playing the same way Wesley Bassaint did. Francis Maui Goa, Samson Okunlola, they have the bodies to throw in there if after they get in here and start training and getting used to the program. But for the most part, I mean, you don't have that many different new starters available, right? Like it's hard to plug and play true freshmen. You can use them as bits and pieces. I don't know
Right.
that that's going to be big enough to win them 8, 9, 10 games as they're currently constructed.
The
So
goal should be to get guys that can, at the very least, sustain you on a successful course for the first half of the season. So by the time that second half of the season rolls in, now these freshmen aren't freshmen anymore. Now
right.
there's a little bit more seasoned and ready to play. They've built their bodies. They've had enough game experience to be able to plug in the rotation, like we saw last year with Nigel Kelly and Wesley Bassaint as he became a starter at the end of the year.
Yeah. This is from David Hernandez. Which team in the ACC has done well with the transfer portal window? Well, I mentioned it earlier. Florida State, I think they're ranked number 1 right now in the transfer portal rankings, according to 247 Sports. And the 8 guys that they signed, by the way, when I broke this down, Fentrell Cypress from Virginia for Florida State was a
Great
14
signing.
game starter, all ACC second team. The defensive lineman, Braden Fisk, who they signed from Western Michigan, 29
Really good
career
signing.
starts. You add Daryl Jackson, assuming he sticks. That's a Miami starter. The offensive line, that's really the only area where they lost a significant number of guys to, losing play, whatever their ability to play,
Their
uh,
eligibility.
their eligibility. They go out and they sign 3 guys that are starters, 22 game starter, 30 game starter, 30 game starter from Auburn, UTEP, and Colorado. Casey Roddick from Colorado, Jeremiah Byers from UTEP, and Keandre Jones from Auburn. 3 guys that are starting offensive linemen. That's hard to do in the transfer portal for anybody. And then tight end, they have to replace Cameron McDonald. They go out and they get a Division II kid who put up a bunch of numbers, 6'7", 245 pounds, Kyle Murdoch, and then Jaheim Bell, who's a tight end from South Carolina, who was sort of a split starter, started 6 games last year. That's a lot of starting experience. And then you look at what they lost, really, outside of running back Treshawn Ward, who was a 6 game starter before Trey Benson sort of took over their backfield down the stretch when they were kicking everybody's ass. Minimal guys. Jared Jackson, defensive tackle, 1 start. Amari Gaynor, linebacker, 1 start in 2022. Those guys are going to Michigan State, North Carolina. So FSU essentially loses 1 half, part-time starter and 2 guys that were just rotational guys. Everybody
Yep.
else. So, the hype for Florida State is real. I think they're going to have a very good team. Jordan Travis coming back. And I'll tell you, I had a conversation earlier this week with Irish Affel, who's covered Florida State for a long time. He's picking them to win the ACC, and the way Kate Klubnik played in the Orange Bowl for Clemson, I wouldn't necessarily disagree at this point.
Yeah, it's just the way Florida State looked at the end of the year, and I think at the beginning of the year we discussed it before the season started. We thought Florida State was going to be a lot better than people anticipated, and to me, it came down to running game and offensive line, and the maturity and the growth of Jordan Travis, which unfortunately I think the watershed moment for him where he really turned the corner was against Miami, the previous season where we lost at the end. He threw that touchdown pass. First of all, that deep ball on Cam Kitchens, and then threw the touchdown pass to win it. Essentially, and get Manny Diaz fired pretty much. After that point, he just became a different player. I think he became a lot more confident as a passer and didn't rely on his legs so much. And when he did end up leaving the pocket, it was trying to still make plays downfield, which he didn't do before. He's always been elusive. He's always been athletic, but now I think he's come along as a passer and a thrower, and I think he'll continue to do that. And on top of that, Benson was amazing down the stretch for Florida State. He ran it up our ass. For God's sakes. But he's a really tough runner, really hard to bring down. I think he led the country or was top 5 at least in broken tackles and forced tackles missed and yards after contact. So I mean, there's nothing you could say about Florida State, man. Nothing really bad. They're going to be good next year. You got to get ready for it. It sucks. I know. I don't want them to be good. I don't like it when they're that good and we suck. If we're going to suck, I want them to suck too. I want there to be an equal level of mediocrity between these two programs. If one is going to rise, I want both to rise at the same time.
All right. Well, we'll see what happens. North Carolina and Louisville are two other teams. North Carolina got 9 transfers. Louisville got 10.
I think Louisville is going to be a lot more difficult, a lot more challenging in terms of the recruiting trail from now on in the transfer portal because of who they got at the head coach now is Luke Fickell.
Yeah, and I think
I'm sorry, Luke Fickell. Jesus Christ.
Luke Fickell went to Wisconsin.
You're right. Brom.
Jeff Brom from Purdue, right? Their guy.
And their offense is going to be a lot more wide open.
Yeah, North Carolina is interesting because they had, I think, 3 consecutive top 15 classes under Mac Brown, 14 actually rated 14 or higher, and they dropped back in the rankings. But part of that was because they signed 9 transfers. Their transfers aren't as good as Florida State's,
and they lost a bunch of guys.
But again, North Carolina, a thorn in Miami's side. I mean, they just are. They're a pain in Miami's ass. That's a program they have to finally get past, and I don't know when that's going to happen.
Until Mac Brown retires again.
Yeah, which could be soon. So we'll see. All right, let's keep moving on. Next question here on our list. David Hernandez is actually no, I just read David Hernandez. How many of the early signees are enrolling early? Same with the transfers. Was wondering about spring depth chart giving the 18-ish that have left Miami. This is from Jake Campbell at the one Coach Soup. Jake, to be honest with you, a lot of the private school kids that are in Miami's class, they have to finish school through the summer. And I had some conversations. I know Ruben Bain is planning to get in early. He's finishing classes up early to get there. But a lot of the rest of the guys in this class, I think they've all got different issues, right? With graduation and extra classes that they're taking. I can't give you a clear number. I haven't done enough of my homework on that. And I'll say this. I know this because it happened last year, and I know this from some of the things I've heard in the offseason. There's a lot of guys having surgery. So spring football, again, may be another session where you just have a bunch of young guys getting reps and sort of hoping that they develop as players so that when the fall comes around, you can actually get something out of them.
And let me issue this warning again, as I do on an annual basis. Do not rely upon what you see in spring football in the spring game as gospel. Don't rely on what you hear about the scrimmages as gospel, and that it's going to be a transition into the season. Because for God's sakes, how many times have we seen guys make plays in spring games or have a great spring camp and then do absolutely nothing come the fall? I mean, who was the guy last year? Was the walk-on receiver that had a big game?
Right.
Then nobody's heard of ever again.
Right. I never worry about what happens in spring games, and honestly, to me, what I look for in the spring is how many of the freshmen and second year guys actually start to get in the rotation. Like, do they get first team reps? Like that to me speaks much more volumes about whether or not they're actually going to be used in the fall, and whether or not the coaches have confidence in them. Because in the end, when the transfers come in or the older guys get healthy, etc., off of surgery, they're usually going to go to the bench. I just want to see how they perform. Do they look like they're ready to take over those kind of spots? A couple of other guys who might be in early, Francis Mauigoa. I know he went home to be with his family, and I know he's coming back with his brother. He's graduated early. I know most of the IMG kids, but anybody from American Heritage and some of these other private schools that are coming to Miami, I don't think they're necessarily going to be in early. I know Mario mentioned there could be as many as 20, but I think he was counting transfers as well in that number. So we'll find out at some point. Maybe the next podcast or the one after, I'll give you a better answer for that, Jake. As it stands right now, I know it's super early, but what is your feeling about how good this offense will be? The line appears to be in better shape, but nothing yet for the wide receivers. This is Brent Peterson, B Pete 9121.
Man, I think the offensive line will be better, but I think a lot of it will depend on the center position to me. I think, like I said, Ja'Kai Clark is okay, but he's not the kind of center you need or you have to have if you're going to be competitive and trying to win the ACC, trying to land a college football playoff spot, even being a competitive top 25 team. He's not that kind of center. And I think the center is the most critical position on the offensive line. Left tackle gets highlighted a lot because the center is the guy that makes all the calls. He sets everything up. He's one of the ones that is combo blocking a lot of the time, that has to cover double gaps depending on the pass protection. Those are all important things. And I think if you can get 5 solid offensive linemen with 3 backups that you could count on, it's going to look a lot better this season. Now, how good is the offense going to look? I don't know yet, because I don't know if we can count on Trevante Citizen coming off an injury. Is Don Chaney going to be somebody you can count on, because he's had a long injury history here as well? Henry Parrish is a good back, but he's not a number 1 back. We saw that. He's good, he's solid, but he's not a guy that you want carrying the ball 25 times a game. And Mark Fletcher, he's a young guy. He's not ready to carry that load yet, I don't think. And neither is Chris Johnson, right? The other guy from Dillard. He's just going to be sort of a kick returner, punt returner early on in his career, I believe, to use his speed. So if the running game's not there, then I think it's going to be problematic for this offense again. If the running game can't get going, I think the entire offense will suffer. And I also think unless Jacoby George or another number 1 or another guy that's an outside receiver that can make plays develops or emerges, or they get that guy through the portal, then I think it's also going to be a struggle. And again, as up and down as Will Mallory was, he was a productive player on this team for a long time. So that's going to be a hole that you have to fill. Can Elijah Arroyo come off the injury and replace and plug and play for Will Mallory? Or is it going to have to be Jaleel Skinner or Khalil Brantley or somebody else?
Yeah, I don't see how this offense is going to be markedly better. First I need to see who the coordinator is going to be, right? And what kind of adjustments they're going to make. I think the feeling with some of the people in Tyler Van Dyke's camp is that they're going to go more to a passing attack than a running attack than what they were before. I mean, that's part of the reason I think he agreed to come back and be a part of this for next year. That kind of goes up against what Mario likes to do. Mario's a run first guy, establish the run. But who will be the coordinator? Will they make those adjustments, etc.? That all remains to be seen. I think if they come back and they try to run the same kind of offense and they're banged up, I don't see how they're better than what they were. And oh, by the way, you want me to give you the rankings? You want me to give you the ugly numbers? Against FBS opponents, Miami averaged
21 points.
19.4 points a game, 112th. This is FBS opponents. This takes away the cupcake FCS game. They averaged 5 yards a carry, 103rd. They averaged 3.34 yards a carry, 109th against FBS opponents. On third down, 37%, which was 81st. Red zone TD percentage, 44.8%, which is 119th. I mean, these are god-awful offensive numbers. They averaged 3.27 sacks a game, 113th. Explosive plays, 38 total on the year. That ranked 106th. And in turnovers, they turned it over 24 times. That ranked 122nd. There's nowhere to go but up.
I would, and I would venture to say those are probably worse numbers than under Dan Enos.
I'd have to go back and double check it, because I have all this shit charted, but I just don't have those numbers to play.
But I'm guessing. I'm just throwing it out there. Hot take.
Yeah, hot take. Well, I will say this. You ready for me to give you FSU's offensive numbers versus FBS opponents?
All right. Let me guess the points per game.
Go ahead.
34.
35, 18th in the country. Yards per play.
Yards per play, 9.8.
6.83. That was
okay.
9th in the country. Rushing yards per play.
6.3.
5.22, which is 14th in the country. Third down percentage, 5th in the country, 51.2%.
I was going to say 52. Okay.
Yeah, red zone TD percentage versus FBS opponents. Go ahead.
65%.
69.49%, 21st in the country. And here's the big one. You ready for this? All right. FSU explosive plays. How many do you think they had? Miami had 38. How many do you think FSU had?
86.
90. Third in the country. If you look at how many explosive plays, 20 yards or more, compared to how much they gave up, 90 minus 41, how much is that?
That is 50 or 49.
40. They were plus 49 in explosive plays. Only turned it over 13 times.
You confused me making me do math. This is why I went to law school, dude.
Yeah, well, listen, again, that just shows you the gap between Miami and FSU as an offense. Give them their due. They got it right. Mike Norvell did a good job addressing their needs and getting them better. All right, this question is from Nick Strong, KY Kane 23. How about just an update with the number of scholarships left now that 2 guys turned pro? Okay, first of all, I'm counting Brian Balaam among 18 guys who entered the transfer portal. I think Brian Balaam, I don't necessarily think he's coming back. I think he's probably going to graduate and go somewhere else. But if he's back, count that scholarship as one of the 85. Let's go by the numbers real quick. I got 4 scholarship quarterbacks, 5 running backs, that's 9. I've got 9 receivers, that's 18. I've got 6 tight ends, that gives
24,
you 24, 16 offensive linemen,
40,
40 offensive players. You ready? Defensive linemen, 17. Linebackers is 9, so that's 26.
26,
Cornerbacks, 8, that's
34,
34, and 6 safeties.
40,
40 and 40 is
80,
add a punter and a kicker.
82.
So now you're at 80. You're at 82 scholarships. You've got 3 that you could potentially use here, plus whoever ends up leaving after the spring, which I suspect there will be some guys that'll be gone after the spring.
Yep.
There's your math, ladies and gentlemen.
Look at that. Broke that down.
Tyler,
After that first question, I got warmed up. I was good to go.
This is from Tyler Overly, T Overly on Twitter. Louisville going 6-6 at best next year, so capers me. In other words, he thinks the young man, the 5-star recruit Capers, who committed to Louisville earlier today, is going to end up going to Miami. I tend to think it's a long time between now and signing day. Yes, I think Capers, TJ Capers, 5-star edge rusher, could end up flipping. Number 2, who is the most impressive Kane signee you've seen at the All-American games? That's a good question. I wasn't in San Antonio, but I know this roster. Look, Francis Mauigoa physically is such an imposing physical threat. I think without question, he is the most impressive physically. But the guy that I kind of have a soft spot for is Mark Fletcher, because I think from a leadership perspective, skill perspective, potential perspective, it's Alonzo Highsmith. That's what I view when I see him. And I know what a special guy Alonzo Highsmith was for this program.
High praise.
High praise, yes. Which responses to your interviews on the NIL piece surprised you the most? Man, again, that was a fun piece to write. I would tell you go read that at the Athletic. But just Cliff Notes version. I think the one about the kid who told me he got a phone call, or his parents and his high school coaches got a phone call saying, "Don't sign, flip to us, we'll pay you $1 million on signing day," was probably the one that maybe not surprised me the most, but certainly sort of lived up to the lore of NIL, right? $1 million offer. What do you do if you're that kid in that situation?
Yeah, and Brandon Innes talked a little bit about that kind of stuff, where he was saying, a lot of teams came at me with a lot of NIL money, and I had to sit down and be clear-headed about it and speak to my parents about it and say, do we take the short-term money, or are we looking more towards building me for the longer term, right? That long money, the money that comes in the league. Because if I take this short-term money, there's no guarantee that I'll be developed into what I need to be able to get into the NFL and get paid for real. Whereas if I go to Ohio State, or wherever it is I feel comfortable, I feel they'll develop me into an NFL caliber receiver where the real money will come. So I'm willing to sacrifice some of that NIL to be able to get to the real money, to the real show, the life-changing money, which is an interesting balance. I mean, at the end of the day, it depends on how you're brought up. It depends on your family structure. It depends on how sound of a foundation you have in terms of the people around you, and who's raising you, who's advising you. I mean, it's easy to say, yeah, I'll take $1 million right now. But if you're the type of athlete that can make $100 million or $50 million or $20 million in the NFL, and all you need is to go to the right program to be developed into that, then you've got to be clear-headed enough to understand that it's worth sacrificing stuff for in the now to be able to get stuff later. And I think that's a societal problem that we have now. I think everything is instant gratification. I want things now. I want to be paid for what I am right now. And you're willing to mortgage the future to take what you can get right now, when, if you are patient a little bit, allow yourself to suffer and sacrifice for a little bit, you may be able to get even more down the road. And it's interesting to see the kids that make those decisions, that are willing to give up the short term for the long term, and not be swayed by just money, because it shows that there's still kids out there with character that understand what it's all about, and have really good people around them that are advising them to do so, not kids that are being pushed by a handler or a bagman to take $1.5 million, get their cut, and send the kid to Siberia no matter what.
Yeah, I think for the most part, a lot of the kids that I spoke to that are top 100 type players, I think all of them realize that the real money's in the NFL, and the immediate big payday. I think it's more enticing for the kids who may not get to the NFL, right? The guys who know that they're kind of borderline. I think that's where it really sort of affects, decision, so to speak.
Yeah.
This is from Danto3386 Daniel on Twitter. What's your gut feeling on McLean, Cormani McLean? Class seems great compared to what we've had in recent years, and I'm super excited either way. And it's cool if he goes elsewhere, but would love to add him. Look, my gut feeling again, the journalist in me tells me he's going elsewhere because
Hmm.
why delay this decision?
Right.
Uh, the person who wants to believe what he told me and that everything's going to be okay and to go to Miami wants to believe that. I'm gonna I'm gonna say I don't know. I don't even want to. I don't even want to be on one side of the fence because I really don't feel strongly either way. I am torn
And
as
if you
far as
pick one
what's
side
going
of
to
the
happen.
fence, the other side of the fence is going to come after you.
Absolutely, no doubt. This is from Andrew V_17. What are your odds on Gaddis staying? Seems like wide receivers don't want to come here. Second question: do you think Mario will go after a transfer portal running back? Only Henry Parrish and Don Chaney will be healthy in the spring. I don't think any decisions as far as personnel and going out and having to bring in somebody else because of the amount of guys that are available is going to affect what they do. They'll use walk-on running backs like they did in this last spring. I think they've got their 5 scholarship running backs. As far as the odds on Gaddis staying, I'm going to say 35%.
That's an interesting percentage.
Uh, as far as wide receivers who don't want to come here, look, I think that has a lot more to do with the fact that Miami hasn't produced many NFL wide receivers.
Yeah.
Charleston Rambo came here, tore it up, didn't get drafted. Mike Harley put up career numbers, didn't get drafted. Miami has to change that. It's more about saying we have X amount of guys in the NFL. You know, KJ Osborne is sort of carrying the torch in that regard for Miami right now, and he's a transfer. You have to get homegrown kids, have success. Ohio State right now, Brian Hartline is a huge thorn in Miami's side. I know they want J.J. Smith, who's committed, the 2024 5-star wide receiver, the number 2 overall recruit the next cycle, is committed to Ohio State. That's a guy Miami's trying to flip. Will they? They better throw the ball and have some success this year if that's going to happen.
I would say if Jacoby George develops and some of the younger guys develop and have a good season, that'll go a long way towards enticing recruits.
This is from Jeffrey Cook. Not sure this has been addressed, but any chance Tyler Van Dyke does transfer out in the spring? I recall you saying he wants to stay at Kane, but maybe he bolts to SMU. QB spot open or elsewhere if he's not liking the look of things. Thanks. Yeah, I think this decision on the offensive coordinator will play a heavy role in Tyler Van Dyke's future.
Yeah, and I'll say, like he said, he may just go through the spring, see what the offense looks like, see if he feels comfortable, and say, okay, I'm out.
This is from J.K. Slay on Twitter. Without some strong additional portal additions and having to depend on freshmen next year, could yield the same result. Losing record, am I wrong? I think we've talked about this quite a bit, JK. I
Yep.
don't think you're wrong. I think without a few key additions here, I think 500 is what I would predict right now with this team.
Yeah, I think you're probably looking at 5-7 to 7-5, somewhere in that range.
From Connor 654-71489. I love the fact that he puts.
I love these. I love these people with like phone numbers and prison numbers on there.
Can you talk about the organization of the transfer recruiting department with Alonzo Highsmith and Rogers? Who else is involved? How do they determine which kids are fits culturally? How closely is Alonzo working with Mario, etc. Looking forward to listening as always. Connor, thank you. I know you send us lots of questions. Look, I honestly do not know enough about the intricacies of who handles what in that regard. I know Rogers was at Michigan State, and you know I think he's a Columbus grad or it's familiar. His parents, I think his parents are very close with Alonzo, and so that's part of the reason why he's here. It's identifying guys. I think Roger identifies them, brings them to Alonzo. Alonzo evaluates it, goes to Mario, and they have discussions about who they want to go after. I think the one thing about Alonzo is he handles a lot of different hats with Mario. I know that they do talk often. I know that there's a lot of times where Alonzo is maybe an intermediary between him and Radakovich. Everybody's busy. Radakovich is busy trying to get this new facility built. Alonzo's, leading scouting and the transfer portal. Rogers is involved with the transfer. There's a lot of different people, a lot of analysts, a lot of people around, and they're all trying to get in front of Mario. In the end, Mario's the guy who makes all the decisions in terms of personnel and what's going to happen, who they're going to go after. All
Yep.
right, we've reached, I think, the end of our mailbag, Carlos. I'm sure we probably have more somewhere in here. I think this is a very interesting time for Miami football, very interesting time for college football. I hope that you enjoyed today's episode. If you tuned in, there will be more, as I said, in the weeks and months ahead. Maybe I start having some more shows talking recruiting, talking ACC, bigger picture, because we are going to go through some months here where maybe there's not a ton of Hurricanes
It'll be a
content per se.
little lean moving forward, and it's going to
Literally,
require me having to do some research on my own and start getting more into the recruiting stuff, which sucks, but it's okay. But I'll do it. I'll do it for you guys.
Carlos, thanks for coming on with me, and make sure you check out the MIA All Day Pod, where Carlos, he does a great job breaking things down in his own way. He carries an entire show by himself, which I could never do a lot of the time. I mean, I don't know how you do it. You talk
It
to
requires a lot of Diet Coke and years of practice at being just a schizophrenic.
Okay, well, whatever it is, you're a must follow, a must tune into. Make sure you check out everything Carlos does with his podcast. We will be back soon after the coaching convention with more conversation. Malik Rozier, we'll see. He said he's going to do a podcast with me on Thursday. I think we're going to get it done. We will have more wide right, but for now, that wraps up today's episode. Happy New Year. We will see you guys soon.
Peace.